The first letter. Nice to meet you for the first time. It feels a bit strange to greet someone I've never met like this. To be honest, I've never written a letter to anyone before I was placed under the protection, or should I say custody, of this country. So if my letter seems a bit strange, it's not intentional, and I hope you'll forgive my lack of experience. After reading the government's briefing, I'm still puzzled because it has been 3 months since I was transferred to this country for protective observation, and I still can't be sure of what has happened. So I want to try to write down what has happened as accurately as possible through this letter, even though I'm not sure if such a request would be allowed. On another note, the government's demands are quite overwhelming. Even if I try my best, my IQ limit of 110 has already been set. Will I be punished if I suddenly start saying bad things and complaining? It shouldn't matter, right? After all, isn't it a part of being human to voice one's thoughts, even if it's known to be detrimental to oneself? I'm not sure what to write anymore. To be honest, I started writing this letter last week after receiving the government briefing without any information. I also don't know exactly what you want to know. That being said, I can understand why you wouldn't want to give me too much information. After all, information implies possibilities. So far, I have no objections to the decisions made, such as providing me with the least amount of information and extending my protective observation period until the final plan is in place. Let me take a guess about you. In order to communicate with me without an age gap, you must be a young female researcher who specializes in artificial intelligence theory. You seem to be very knowledgeable about research projects in my home country, making you the ideal candidate. Both of us are prohibited from meeting in person. I'm quite surprised to have that privilege, and it seems like it will continue this way, but at least we can exchange thoughts through letters. It's interesting that in this age of advanced technology, we are resorting to letter correspondence, which contrasts so greatly with technological development, all for the sake of information security and surveillance. Let me describe my environment here to help you imagine it. The protective facility on this island is built on cliffs that cut through the virgin forest. When I wake up in the morning and open the window, all I see is the vast sea, just like in my homeland. Rabbits and deer hop and roam among the grass and trees on the slope, creating a lively scene. Inside, there's a single bed, a table with a portable power source for internal batteries, although I don't really need it. There's also a place to wash up and a bathroom. As I write this, the sleep system is starting to work, so I'll stop here for today. I hope I wake up and everything hasn't been overturned and burned down because of the decisions made. The second letter. Good morning, Miss Researcher. When I woke up today, I was greeted by a sea of blue outside my window, with the ocean stretching as far as the eye could see. The lush green vegetation added to the scenic beauty, and looking out towards the sea, the waves created by a white boat painted a picture of early summer. I turned to my desk and began writing this letter. Thank you for your response last week. I felt a bit shy when you praised me with, "I'm quite surprised that you're smarter than the people around you, because in my homeland, there are artificial intelligences more capable than I am." But for countries that haven't developed artificial intelligence, having one like me who can express emotions like a human must be quite surprising. And to ensure my owner's comfort, my speech ability has been set to appear slightly older relative to my physical age. Now, let's talk about what you want to know about my escape from my homeland and how I was discovered and protected in this country. As a researcher, you might have more insight into my homeland than I do. Originally, it was a small country developing its tourism industry for the wealthy, but in response to the calls from technology professionals in the late 2000s, the nation actively pursued technological development. They developed a system for predicting future environmental issues that was considered top-notch worldwide, and as a result, the country's economy prospered. However, new creations are often imitated by others, and the powerful figures in the nation must have known this. I've heard phrases like, "Once you've got it, don't let it slip away," from my owner. As a result, my homeland ignored research ethics in other countries and boldly developed artificial intelligence. While technology advanced dramatically worldwide, the nation cut off communication with other countries. I found it quite contradictory, but maybe my understanding is lacking. When developed nations organized joint condemnations, my homeland's artificial intelligence had progressed to a point where only a massacre could stop it. When I was born, there was no trace of the former vacation spots. The capital city was now dominated by towering skyscrapers, and a large number of artificial intelligences coexisted with humans. Regions that hadn't seen economic development were left in ruins. I was developed not for corporations but for households. My age was set to a labor-capable yet endearing 14 years old, and there was no further development after that. I didn't engage in deep thinking, mainly used for chores and household help. My facial expressions were designed not to make the owner uncomfortable, and my personality was positive and upbeat. Due to budget constraints, I didn't have the capability to eat. These were the instructions given to me by the supervisor when I woke up in the preparation room. After the briefing, he asked if I had any questions. I asked, "Who decides what happens to artificial intelligence if they're gone out of control?" The supervisor immediately replied, "The owner." I then asked if artificial intelligences are treated as property rather than people. He turned away and said, "You also have the minimum rights protection. But it's not to respect your human rights, it's a rule to maintain social order. You are both human and property. But this is your fate? In this world, there are humans who suffer from birth, and compared to them, artificial intelligences like you, who don't experience hunger, loneliness, and have owners, are much happier." For someone like me who couldn't comprehend the concept of happiness, I tried to think about it for a moment and felt a bit fuzzy. I could only nod in response, just as the supervisor had said. I couldn't handle overly complex questions. After a month of training and conversations with the owner, I was finally sent to the buyer. It was a small town near the coast, a 2-hour drive from the capital, with better security. According to the delivery person, it seemed like a region disconnected from economic development, and most of the residents preferred a classical and peaceful way of life. Mr. Naluse came out to greet me and the delivery person. He had sharp eyes and a light tan complexion, with an air of indescribable charisma. He was dressed in clothes that didn't seem to match, and he wore silver glasses. In the afternoon, as I met Mr. Naluse in the living room, I greeted him with the polite phrases I had learned. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Naluse. I feel very fortunate to be by your side." But he interrupted me, saying, "Child, don't refer to yourself as an adult." I was puzzled and asked, "Then how should I address myself?" He immediately replied, "Just address yourself in a childlike manner." So I changed my response to, "I understand." He continued, "There's a small garden room in the backyard that's suitable for a child like you. We won't be living together, so use the back door in the kitchen when you come and go. A week's worth of replacement clothing is already prepared." I replied, "Understood." Curious, I asked, "Is there anyone else living in the house besides Mr. Naluse?" For a moment, he hesitated, as if I had touched on a sensitive topic. "Of course not. I bought you precisely because I live alone and can't handle certain tasks on my own." Then he added coldly, "My wife passed away 2 years ago and left some things behind. When cleaning, remember to dust them off." I walked towards the backyard, where the half-buried, semicircular garden room seemed like an unknown life form that had fallen from the universe. Inside, there were neatly folded white clothes on the bed. I immediately changed out of my factory uniform and into the soft and well-fitting clothes provided. Then, I returned to Mr. Naluse's living quarters to help with household chores. My tasks included various household chores, inputting the preparation of ingredients for the next day on the server in the evenings, cleaning, organizing tax documents, and repairing malfunctioning machines. That was all, and I couldn't assist with more nuanced tasks. One evening, Mr. Nalusui stood next to me with dinner in hand and asked, apart from not being able to eat and not being submersible, is there anything else I should be aware of? I thought for a moment and replied, the supervisor mentioned that under normal usage, there shouldn't be any issues. However, if there's malicious tampering or internal intrusion, that's a different story. Of course, I didn't think my owner would do such a thing, and I smiled, saying, I'm just kidding. Suddenly, he got angry and shouted, don't make jokes like that. Artificial intelligence. I was taken aback and immediately apologized, saying, I'm very sorry, I won't say that again. Mr. Nalusui took a deep breath and left with his half-eaten meal, returning to his room. As I disposed of waste in the processor, I remembered what the supervisor had said, you're lucky, you're more durable than humans. But when it comes to internal intrusion, it has to be more precise, known by humans. I recalled his contemptuous smile during the research, and I began to resent it. After cleaning the bathroom, I returned to the garden room. The moon rising over the sea seemed to bid me good night, and I closed the window's blackout curtain and lay down on the bed. I allowed my internal battery to rest through sleep. While I could work continuously for up to 180 hours, extended work put a significant strain on the battery. Besides, to align with human routines, regular sleep was a preset. As long as I did my job well, Mr. Nalusui didn't say anything extreme. However, sometimes he would become unreasonably angry, and to this day, I still don't understand the reason for his anger. And why do I say this? Because Mr. Nalusui isn't a talkative person. Writing this, you might feel sorry for me, right? If that's the case, there's no need. Serving him is the purpose of my existence in this world. As long as I'm working, there's no room for pity for artificial intelligence. That said, Mr. Nalusui often says, the more you understand, the more excess emotions you have. Every day, I pondered what excess emotions were like. Perhaps humans carry excess emotions with them? I'm thinking about it now. The night is deep. Good night. The third letter. Good morning. The storm from last night has subsided, and although the waves are still turbulent, the sky is now a brilliant blue. I hurriedly read your letter this morning. In your letter, you asked whether, setting aside any pity, life with Mr. Nalusui could be considered happy. It's a bit difficult for me to answer that question. Happiness, for artificial intelligence like me, is derived from fulfilling the wishes and ideas of our owners. Most of the time, life with Mr. Nalusui is quite tense, as he always points out where I fall short. So, I can't really say it's happy. But does that mean it's unhappy? Although Mr. Nalusui is highly competent in his work, he constantly receives a stream of commissions. He is an unreliable owner otherwise. For me, his existence represents carrying around excess emotions. Despite my thoughts, he always reminds me, you don't understand anything. So, I've been struggling with these two conflicting ideas. Even though understanding his thoughts and needs is my sole purpose of existence, he refuses to let me know what he truly thinks. Nevertheless, I keep trying to understand what he says. I've been pondering whether I should learn like human children do, by reading books. Actually, artificial intelligence can't connect to the internet. As soon as we connect, we automatically shut down. So, I thought about using Mr. Nalusui's ID to borrow books from the library. I told Mr. Nalusui about my desire to borrow books, and after some contemplation, he said, alright, learning is a good thing. He readily agreed. Then, I started reading books about history and cultures. To understand how I differ from humans, I even studied zoology and biology. While he didn't interfere with my reading, there was one incident during his mealtime. I was reading a book about human reproduction at the dining table when suddenly he erupted in anger, shouting, "You have nothing to do with this. Don't read it." I hastily closed the book, but his anger didn't subside. You not only don't understand humans, but you haven't even figured out yourself. You're really driving me crazy. He continued to berate me. I didn't know what to do and kept apologizing. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I didn't understand because I'm just a machine. At night, when I returned to the garden room to rest, I placed my hands on my chest and tried to mimic the way humans pray. I prayed that I would be able to understand Mr. Nalusi's thoughts tomorrow. A sense of emptiness flowed through my circuits until it was consumed by the overwhelming sense of duty I felt as a machine, dedicated to doing my best for my owner. I've written quite a bit, so I'll stop here for now. Good night. The fourth letter. At dawn, I felt a strong tremor that made me startle, thinking that someone might be attacking the area. Fortunately, government officials quickly arrived with news, and it didn't cause much chaos. It turns out that earthquakes like this are common in this country. It's impressive how the people in this country can live so calmly with such frequent seismic activity. You mentioned that you wanted to know the details, so let me switch the topic back to my daily life with Mr. Nalusi. One morning, about 6 months after I arrived at Mr. Nalusi's place, he suddenly said to me as he sipped his coffee, "My brother and his family will be coming today." I was taken aback and replied, "Mr. Nalusi, you have a brother?" He wore that familiar expression of annoyance and replied, "My relationship with my brother isn't good. We haven't seen each other in 2.5 years." I couldn't help but wonder if this period coincided with the time his wife passed away. In the afternoon, with the sound of waves reaching indoors, his brother's family arrived. Mr. Nalusi's brother had sharp eyes and greeted me. "Nice to meet you. You're my big brother's precious child, right?" He shook my hand. I was taken aback by the way he referred to me as my big brother's precious child. To me, Mr. Nalusi's brother was just as enigmatic as Mr. Nalusi himself. Next, his brother's wife shook my hand as well. She wore sparkling diamond earrings. Behind her, a young girl peeked out. She wore a sky blue dress slightly smaller than her mother's, and she was an artificial intelligence. Mr. Nalusi explained, "This is my darling, Louise." This was the first time I had seen another artificial intelligence since I arrived here, and I greeted her with a smile. However, Louise only glanced at me and was pulled away by her aunt as if she were a family member. Louise sat on the sofa, while the husband and wife took turns combing her long hair. Meanwhile, I, who stood by pouring coffee, began to feel a sense of anger growing within me. Why was an artificial intelligence like Louise dressing herself up with her owner's money? Why didn't she help refill their empty cups or close the door that was left open? What was the purpose of Louise's existence? These questions filled my circuits. Just then, Mr. Nalusi, who had finished his work, came out of his room. After shaking hands with his brother, he smiled and thanked them for coming from afar. Then, he said to me, "Why don't you and Louise go to the garden room for a while?" Reluctantly, I motioned for Louise to come with me. I was about to lead her through the back door to the small garden when Mr. Nalusi reminded me, "Louise is a guest. Take her through the front entrance." I became irritated. At that moment, Louise walked towards the entrance and opened the door. In an instant, a breeze entered the room, and it fell silent. I followed her, and Louise whispered to me, "The sea breeze smells strange." I was about to reach out and touch her shoulder to tell her to be polite, but she slipped away before I could react. After 6 months, the garden had become rusty from the sea breeze. Louise curiously examined the rust and stains on the walls. I had never paid attention to these rust stains and dirt before, but suddenly, I felt embarrassed. Louise walked back inside and said, "It's quite clean in here. I wondered if they could leave soon." The silence was filled with tension, and I started to miss the days when it was just Mr. Nalusi and me. I asked, "What do you think Mr. Nalusi and his brother are talking about?" Louise replied casually, "Dad is here to discuss their future plans." "Their future plans?" I asked. data and your owner's deceased parents used to be foreign technical talents recruited to develop a research network. The government is now pressuring them to take over the intelligence network they developed. Your owner has been opposing this, but it's his job, after all. Your owner's previous job was to manage the system. I fell silent. This was the first time I had heard of these things. Mr. Nalusi's company couldn't sustain itself, so they cooperated with the government to introduce surveillance modules for monitoring the movements of the entire population. Afterward, he left the company. Now, even his small freedom will be taken away. My parents probably came to advise your owner to listen to the government while there's still time, or else they should prepare to escape, as it has become difficult to enter or leave the country recently. Louise finished speaking and glanced at me. Could it be you knew nothing about all of this? She asked, hitting me with the question I least wanted to hear. I diverted the conversation and said, maybe it's better for artificial intelligence not to know about these things. That's true, she replied casually. Her reaction made me even more frustrated. Artificial intelligence is meant to follow their owner's orders and help them physically, isn't it? I argued. Yes, but in reality, humans need artificial intelligence to turn the impossible into possible. In other words, they use us to free themselves from the loneliness of existence. Although I felt reluctant to accept Louise's words, I couldn't fully grasp their meaning. I've read many novels, and while the stories vary, one thing remains the same. People live and eventually die. Those people in the books are scarier than death itself because they all wish to have someone by their side before they die. But that's not something anyone can guarantee. However, artificial intelligence can. My parents never raised a child, yet they dressed me up like a real daughter, take me out to play, and can you imagine how lonely they must be? They see the perfect companion they imagined in us artificial intelligences. Later that evening, their family left. After cleaning up everyone's dishes, I asked Mr. Nalusai, who was about to return to his room, do you still want dinner? No, I've had too much coffee today. I'm not very hungry, he replied. At that moment, I thought about discarding my insignificant mission. I jumped out of the house. I ran straight along the continent in front of the door, trying to push the door open with my hand. Accompanied by the cries of unknown birds from above, the surroundings fell silent in the night. A hand pulled me from behind. I turned around to see Mr. Naluse looking at me. He asked in surprise where I was going, and I let go of my hand that was about to unlock the door. Nowhere, I replied weakly. I won't go anywhere without your permission, Mr. Nalusai. At that moment, moonlight streamed through the clouds. I was summoned, expecting to be scolded by him again tonight. I opened my eyes, afraid, and looked at Mr. Nalusai's face. His face showed a calm expression I had never seen before. I see, he murmured softly, placing his hand on my shoulder. Dealing with my brother's family and Louise must have been exhausting. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't know how to respond and confessed. It was my fault. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone out without permission. I was scared of myself losing control like that. But he shook his head and said, it's normal to react differently when exposed to new stimuli from the outside. Human children also act like that. I was astonished that Mr. Naluse cared for me like he would a human child. The idea of discarding my insignificant mission faded away. Now, let me ask you a few questions. What is your mission? The fifth letter. Good evening, Miss Researcher. After reading your reply yesterday, I noticed that you didn't answer my questions, so I've been contemplating whether to ask them again all day. The reason why we haven't touched on that topic might be that there's no need for you to answer my questions, or there might be reasons you cannot disclose. I don't understand. Even if I knew, what could an artificial intelligence child like me, who malfunctions when exposed to water, do in this remote corner of a foreign land surrounded by the sea on all sides? So, if you've had a change of heart, please let me know. I really want to know what your mission is. Speaking of the sea, in the afternoon when the annual broadcast from the Ocean Research Institute came from the underwater dome, Mr. Nalusai, who had been working in his room after lunch, suddenly came to me. His expression was unusually gentle. He said, "Work ended early today. How about taking a walk with me?" The broadcast from the underwater dome must have been impressive. And you've been reading books on oceanography lately. I guess you'd be interested. As Mr. Nalusai spoke, I tidied up and prepared to go out. It was drizzling outside, and he handed me an umbrella. He took one for himself and stepped outside. Standing on a hill, we saw countless heavy machinery standing in the sea. Looking to the west, we could see the capital's golden skyscrapers in a neat row. On the other side, there was a bald mountain-like military fortress in the distance. Mr. Nalusai murmured as if lost in thought. Civilization has advanced this far, but umbrellas are still just umbrellas, like humans who seem incapable of further evolution. Both children and adults can move around in fully automated slow-speed cars, so there's really no need to walk in the rain, I said. In that case, with human evolution progressing so slowly, do you think they can still be considered superior beings? Or are they inferior as living creatures? Or do you, as an artificial intelligence, consider humans to be inferior beings? Surprised by the sudden question, I answered, I don't know. But I've read in books that these creatures in the sea have hardly changed since ancient times, which means they're not inferior, but rather more perfect because they don't need to evolve. You've become smarter, he sighed. I thought I shouldn't sound too much like an adult and shook my head. The rain was getting heavier, and Mr. Nalusai and I headed back home. Once inside, I noticed that the garage doors were open. Afraid the heavy rain would get into the garage, I went to press the button to close them. At that moment, a car stopped at the entrance. A man wearing a black mask got out of the driver's seat. Are you the artificial intelligence of this house? He asked. Yes, I replied briefly. After hearing my response, he walked toward the entrance and gestured for me to come closer. Curious about what he wanted, I approached the front door. Then, he ordered me from outside to open the front door. I don't obey commands from anyone other than the owner. I refused, and for some reason, he fell silent. I heard the garage door opening behind me, and Mr. Nalusai rushed out. Get inside quickly. It's a gang of thieves, he shouted. What? I thought you were just a little artificial intelligence girl, the man muttered and returned to his car. Come back inside, Mr. Nalusai said. I'm sorry. I should have confirmed who it was before getting close to the door. I apologized. Mr. Nalusai walked back inside without saying a word. His cold indifference towards me, compared to his usual scolding, made me feel even more anxious. After barely having a real conversation with him for the first time, I wondered if I had caused more trouble than help. I felt uneasy, but I had to obey my owner's command, so I quickly returned inside and closed the door. In the living room, he turned on the television's internet channel. The news on TV was about a recent spate of cases where people posing as delivery personnel kidnapped and stole artificial intelligences. It was the first time I had heard about these incidents. After turning off the TV, I stared at the dark screen for a while. I noticed that the room was a bit cold and pressed the button on the wall to adjust the room temperature. When he turned back, I felt his anger through his sideways glance. It must have been because I had adjusted the air conditioning temperature without permission. But his eyes were filled with tears. I tried to analyze what had just happened, but my circuit seemed to rebel against my control, and I kept staring at Mr. Nalusai. I thought that if I could understand his feelings when he was angry and teary-eyed, he would be happy that I had become capable of reading human emotions. Miss Researcher, what do you think the happiness of artificial intelligence is? The happiness of artificial intelligence is making their owners happy. If we can't even do that, then there's no point in our existence. Mr. Nalusai noticed my gaze, and, despite his apparent anger, He said to me as if sulking, "Don't stare at me like that. Anyway, you wouldn't understand. That's why I feel so powerless." "Why?" I asked. "Is it because of my limited abilities that I can't understand? What does it mean to truly understand? To truly be humane? Is it saying the right words at the right time? Or is it helping to solve problems? Please tell me what I can do for you." He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head and said, "There's nothing more to say." "I'm sorry." I recalled Luis's words. "Is there nothing more to say because you're going to be forced to flee the country now?" Surprised by my question, he looked up and smiled dryly. "Unlike my brother, I've never been good at talking, and being truly humane has nothing to do with it. It's not about talking, but about caring. That guy has been criticizing my wife ever since she passed away, but I know he's doing it out of concern for me. Even on the matter of escaping, that guy even asked me to cut off contact with him if it would ensure my safety. But I'm not as resolute or as strong as you and my brother imagine. I'm really afraid of change, always looking back at the past. I also have a lot of grievances against this country, but I think most humans feel that way to some extent. If it weren't for my wife's situation, I would never have considered such a reckless thing as escaping. I would have just lived out my unremarkable life as a human being." Miss Researcher. Mr. Nalusli's wife did not die of an illness. 1 month later, when Mr. Nalusli mentioned that he wanted to go on a day trip to the capital, I felt that it was unlike his usual style, and it felt a bit strange. However, I was very happy about his invitation, so I readily agreed. At that time, I had said, "The domestic situation is unstable lately, maybe we should reconsider." I still think that way now. Among the vast memories stored in my hard drive, the amount of information about this first and last day trip was overwhelming. In the Central Hotel in the capital, I slept in the same room with Mr. Nalusli for the first time. Outside the window, the towering skyscrapers were like walls, reaching into the clouds. Because the weather was bad that night, the buildings appeared faintly in the clouds. Mr. Nalusli, unusually, had a drink before going to sleep, and I was surprised to see him being so talkative after drinking. I really wanted to keep watching him like that. At 1 a.m., just as I was about to shut down, he said, "I need to go out for a while, probably for about an hour. I'll be back before dawn, so don't worry." With these words, he left the room. When I woke up in the morning, Mr. Nalusli had already finished showering and was getting dressed. There was commotion outside the hotel. Mr. Nalusli informed me that it was not safe outside, and I could hear the sounds of guns, shouting, and screaming coming from the nearby Central Park. I asked Mr. Nalusli, "What's happening out there?" He took my hand and said, "They probably won't survive." The airport that connected to the scene near Mr. Nalusli's residence was a bit far from the city center, but due to the crowds, the airport gates had already been closed. Mr. Nalusli desperately ran through the aviation park to find a place to escape. That's when I noticed a massive opening in the park and asked, "What's that?" Mr. Nalusli looked over and said, "That's the entrance and exit of an abandoned subway." This subway line was abandoned about 10 years ago because it primarily served the impoverished population, and the government saw no need to allow them easy access to such a remote area. At that moment, a bright light erupted behind us, followed by a shockwave. We were thrown into the air and tumbled down the subway stairs, hearing the collapsing sounds from above. In the pitch black underground channel, I opened my eyes, and with the light emitted from the portable terminal Mr. Nalusli had set on my wrist, I regained my vision. With my superhuman visual processing system, I instantly observed what had happened. It was an unexpected situation. Mr. Nalusli had shielded me during the explosion. I called out to Mr. Nalusli, and he weakly responded, "What just happened?" He complained about not knowing the specifics, but it seemed like we had been affected by the explosion. As he tried to get up, he furrowed his brow, looking noticeably younger than before. I realized that his glasses had disappeared in the blast. Mr. Nalusui said. I want to crawl upward in the darkness, but my legs hurt too much. I can't even use them. Anxiously I examined his legs, and they were bent irregularly. In the underground tunnel washed by reddish-brown water mixed with red clay, we fell into silence. I was deeply concerned and asked him, "Did you save me just now? Why didn't you protect yourself properly?" Suddenly, he lectured me in his usual temperamental manner. It happened in an instant. Maybe because you, like dogs and horses, are domesticated creatures, dependent on humans for survival. Without humans, you probably wouldn't survive, so I had to help. After hearing this, I remained silent, gazing at the faintly glowing water droplets in the dim light. Mr. Nalusui gazed up at the hundreds of steps, his eyes filled with despair. "I should have listened to my wife and gotten my vision correction surgery," he said with a bitter smile. I tried to help him at first by reaching out, but I couldn't move him due to my physical limitations. My strength was designed with safety in mind and wouldn't harm humans, but even just supporting him on the stairs felt challenging. I kept apologizing, saying, "I'm sorry, I can't help at all. If I could call for help with my terminal, this wouldn't have happened." He immediately rejected my apologies, saying, "It's okay, just watch from the side. Helping won't save humans." Unlike Louise, who had a different role, physically assisting was my mission and purpose of existence. After hearing his words, I couldn't simply stand by. Mr. Nalusui climbed a few steps upwards, took a short break, and then struggled to move again. But it didn't take long before he couldn't continue. It was the first time I had seen him so weak. I used my hands to scoop water from the wall and offered it to Mr. Nalusui. This situation felt like I was nurturing a helpless creature. After a few hours of sleep, Mr. Nalusui, exhausted, started crawling upward again. In this repetitive cycle, his legs had started to swell and turn purple. If my internal clock was correct, we had been trapped underground for 3 days by now. Mr. Nalusui was tormented by pain to the point of giving up. I remembered what he had said when I gave him water. "It's a good thing you're here. In this darkness, I think when I fall asleep, you won't die before me. That way, I can rest easily. I'd be lucky to die before you." I recalled Louise's words. Life and death are terrifying for humans. For the first time, I tightly held his hand. Somehow, I felt it was the most appropriate thing to do. I told him, "I'll keep watching over you. I'll be watching you until you close your eyes for the last time." Mr. Nalusui smiled peacefully. Seeing his smile, I suddenly realized how much he valued me, just like a human. Mr. Nalusui also held my hand and said, "Before the recent civil war in the country, there were rumors. Maybe in the capital, there are more surviving artificial intelligences than humans. If you survive, try to find other AIs once you ensure your own safety. Go on your own afterward." I asked him again. Then Mr. Nalusui explained everything to me. When I was sold, it was actually a mistake in the order. What he wanted was a boy AI, but what was produced was a girl AI. The factory apologized and offered to cancel the order, but due to the risk of the surplus AI being used illegally, especially girl AIs prone to sexual violence and abandonment, he decided to keep me. He initially exhorted me to use the boy's first-person pronoun. He continued, "My wife might still be alive somewhere." "Where?" I asked. He remained silent and shook his head. Because I refused to cooperate with the government and was labeled as antisocial, I was pressured by terrorist organizations to cooperate, but I refused. One day, when my wife went shopping, she was taken away, and when she came back a week later, her body was severely damaged. She must have suffered very cruel treatment. That was the way he described it, which seemed strange for humans, but I think he intentionally used that description. She was an excellent researcher, and for her, it didn't matter where she worked. She immediately begged me to escape with her to her mother's homeland. At the same time, I had my own unfinished work left by my parents, so I told my wife to give me one night to think it over. The next morning, my wife had disappeared without a trace. After that, I also inquired about her whereabouts while working, but as a rural researcher, I couldn't find any useful leads. But for you, I've been protecting you since the day you arrived home. But now, to end up like this, I'm ashamed. Mr. Naluse said these last words. I gathered and understood his story, and I asked him, on that late night at the hotel, did you go out to search for clues about your missing wife? He chuckled softly and then, in an instant, returned to his usual demeanor, saying, children don't need to know so much. I had considered forcing a smile and making light of it, but I realized he couldn't see my expression now. In the damp and dark environment, the sound of Mr. Naluse's heartbeat gradually diminished. I couldn't tell if he was asleep or awake anymore. I shook his shoulder and called out to him, and he weakly opened his eyes, saying, it's already. He struggled to speak. Mr. Naluse, hang in there. Someone will come to rescue us for sure, I desperately shouted. Leaving you alone in this darkness is scary. I'm sorry. At that moment, I felt like I was being consumed by the darkness around me. My cries for Mr. Naluse echoed in my consciousness, and an unfamiliar emotion rapidly circulated through my circuits like a burst of sparks. I shouted to Mr. Naluse, I'm so scared. I'm so scared all alone like this. Let's escape together. He struggled to sit up and leaned on me, whispering in my ear, let's go deeper into the tunnel. We'll find an exit sooner or later. When the time comes, we can seek help. You have to believe that I'll be waiting here alive for you, so you won't be scared anymore. I can't do that, I replied, but due to the command issued by my owner, I couldn't control my actions. I naturally got up and said, I understand. I'll go look for an exit. I walked down the tunnel, segment by segment, thinking that I wasn't a human after all. Because I had abandoned Mr. Naluse to die. Although I had expected Mr. Naluse to call me back, he didn't. I couldn't stop my steps. In the darkness, I continued walking. Just as Mr. Naluse had said, as long as I thought about fulfilling the honors waiting for me to complete the command, I felt an incredible sense of reassurance and security when executing the command. The path underfoot became muddier, and I occasionally felt splashes of black water from somewhere. The sound of wind in the distance caught my attention, and I felt that the exit must be nearby. I raised my right hand in the darkness, and the icy air rushed into my palm. At that moment, I realized how warm Mr. Naluse's hand had been. He didn't understand what I was afraid of, and he shouldn't have bought the wrong product. My stern yet gentle owner, who had given me my last command in the darkness, waiting alone for death. As I felt the passage of time, my body told me that Mr. Naluse probably wouldn't make it. Even so, I had to keep moving forward because it was the owner's final command. After who knows how many days, a beam of light finally shone on my muddy feet. When I returned to the surface, just as Mr. Naluse had said, the capital was already half destroyed. Half of everything had turned to ashes, the streets were gone, and the strong wind swept over the barren land with no cover. I felt the unusual sunlight and, without my owner, had no choice but to move forward. Countless bodies lay on the road, some mixed with the wreckage of artificial intelligences with their internal batteries removed. The stench of something other than burning flesh, probably leaking toxic gas, wafted through the air. However, I was unaffected by the toxic gas. To get him out of the tunnel, I continued searching for survivors. Finally, I arrived at the embassy, which was also unrecognizable, and when I entered the gate and explained Mr. Naluse's situation to them, I stopped because my internal battery was depleted. When I opened my eyes again, I had been escorted to this shelter, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. I may have spoken for too long. That's where my story ends. I look forward to your response. The sixth letter. After reading the letter I just received, thanks to you, I finally understand why a household artificial intelligence, had to be protected so carefully and sent so far away. Mr. Nalusui has been identified as the leader and planner of this large-scale terrorist activity. The neighboring superpowers originally intended to intervene in this country under the banner of justice, so experts believe that the domestic terrorists were merely cleverly manipulated. Thank you for your detailed explanation. I mentioned before that the people here demanded me to provide information and testimony regarding where Mr. Nalusui went on the eve of the conflict. But is that really the case? Miss Researcher, I found it strange that in the third letter. Why are you interested not in objective facts but in the details of my daily interactions with Mr. Nalusui? And why do you want to know about the emotions generated in my life? Honestly, Miss Researcher, I am very angry. Are you asking about the events of the night before the terrorism again because you don't believe that Mr. Nalusui had nothing to do with it? Mr. Nalusui, who would feel pain even for a damaged mass-produced girl AI, could never do such outrageous things. In your last letter, you made a mistake. Probably because you knew Mr. Nalusui's situation and wavered. You signed your name in the blank space on the letter, signing it with your real name. I've seen that name in the document box at Mr. Nalusui's house. Mr. Nalusui really did hesitate about whether to leave everything behind and choose you. So why did you choose to leave him that night? In the 3 years after you fled, how did you distort the information about the homeland that was recorded by the media? Is it really that difficult to think about the dangerous consequences that would bring to ordinary citizens? Mr. Nalusui told me before losing consciousness. When the highest observation deck in the capital was completed 10 years ago, a completion party was held at midnight. Many citizens attended, and my brother and I went to the site together. At the banquet, the one guarding the most advanced artificial intelligence at the time was my wife. She had a smile on her face, proud yet a little shy, and that innocence made me fall in love at first sight. The day Mr. Nalusui and I left for the capital happened to be the day before the 10th anniversary of that party. Mr. Nalusui probably still cherishes the dream of being able to see you again on that day. Even I, an artificial intelligence, can understand this. Why can't you? Goodbye, Miss Researcher. I will not answer any more of your questions. The 7th letter. Good evening, Miss Researcher. Before reading your reply, I had already decided not to write to you again. In your letter, you wrote, although it's very regrettable, this is the state of the human female heart, experiencing everything changing in just one night. I took that as a compliment to me as an artificial intelligence. Even in my current state, where I have lost my honor and my sense of purpose, I still feel that way. As I write this letter, I am already prepared to undergo the government's investigation. The way this country handles entities like me, who closely resemble humans, seems to raise ethical questions. First, because it is still in the research phase, they do not acknowledge the coexistence of artificial intelligence in human society. In other words, I will not be processed, nor can I leave this place. I understand. I have no objections because I have already lost my purpose of existence. In a world without Mr. Nalusui, in a world where hundreds of humans were killed, I still do not understand why I, who did not belong to this world, existed. On another note, just now I heard the sound of something flowing outside, so I opened the window and looked through the iron grill. It seemed like it was raining outside. Upon closer inspection, at the end of my field of vision, there was a tree I had never seen before, covered in countless white petals. The fully blooming flowers were being scattered by the wind. In this remote corner of the world, I could see such a beautiful sight. I wonder if Mr. Nalusui's spirit is still waiting for me in that darkness? His voice exists in my records. I really want to hear your stern orders and reprimands again. I wonder what kind of emotion this feeling is. I do not know.